Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava, Kamma, daf Nun Daled. Today's daf is sponsored in honor of Adina Hajej's birthday last week by her siblings. The words of Bava Kamma aptly describe her. Whoever engages in the study of Torah and the performance of acts of kindness merits reward equal to the portion of 2 tribes. Today's daf is sponsored by Becky Goldstein in loving memory of her father, Yoel ben Meir Frum. For all of his guidance and sage advice, a lone kinder transport survivor, he rebuilt his family in Montreal where his Torah life inspired mine. His devotion to limud Torah, which we passed down to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and zoche to have 3 children who have done several cycles of the Shas. May he be a militz yosher for all of Klal Yisrael and keep us all safe. Yehi zichro baruch. Today's daf is sponsored by Yael Klempner for the refuah shlema of her dear friend, Sarah Shoshana Bat Sarah Schiffman. Okay, we'll get started with our daf. We are starting at the bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Bet. There's a study guide for today, which will chart out the beginning, which is a lot of Drashot. And then it has a list of all the psukim that we're going to need for the second part of today's class. So at the bottom of Nun Gimel Amud Bet, we go back to the Mishna where it said if a shore falls in and into the pit, and there's items on the shore, the broken vessels, items that are on the shore, or torn things from the board, you don't pay damages for. That's because, well, you could have hopefully told us this at this point. We've seen this so many times. Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishna must not follow Rabbi Yehuda's position, because if you remember, there's a machloket between Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda mechayev on this kekelim bebor. Rabbi Yehuda says you're actually liable for damages caused to vessels in a bore, even though the rabbis say you're not. So the Mishna obviously follows the rabbis and not Rabbi Yehuda's position. So now we're going to finally get to the sugya head on, as opposed to hearing about it, kind of mentioning it as if we know already what it is. Here we're going to actually deal with it head on. So we're going to have a slew of drashot, and you can start by following the chart on the study guide. I actually have to fix one thing, so apologies, I didn't fix it before class. But there is one mistake here, which is that the first columns of shor and bor should be switched. It should be shor is pator from kelim and chamor is pator from adam. Shor, it says kelim, it should be shor velo adam, chamor velo kelim. I did it reverse by accident. I'll fix it before I put it up later on the site. Okay, so now Rabbi Yehuda mechayev on this kekelim bebor. So my time at the Rabbanan, where does Rabbanan get it from? To Amar Kra, and again, you should know this in your sleep. Nafal shama shor chamor, shor velo adam, chamor velo kelim. We said it so many times. Okay, shor comes to exempt adam, chamor comes to exempt kelim. Okay, now that means you're only liable for a shor or a chamor. Today, this is going to be a big focus of our discussion. When the Torah says shor or chamor, what do they mean? So right now, we're going to assume shor and chamor, according to the rabbis, means shor, chamor. Kind of, we assume any animal, although we're going to have to see how we learn that. That's going to be part of today. But it's certainly going to exclude humans and exclude vessels. Rabbi Yehuda, what does he say? Because it seems to exclude all these things. Well, he's going to say, O lerabot et hakelim. The word O, shamor, shor o chamor, a shor or, right, an ox or a donkey, comes to say, okay, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's over here in the chart, l'chayev al nezek l'kelim, okay? From there, we're going to learn it's an extra word. Now, we'll see in a minute. Maybe it's not an extra word, but Rabbi Yehuda says that word is extra, and it's coming to teach you that you're liable for damages to vessels. So now comes the Gemara and says, the Rabbanan, what are you going to do with the word O? Right? We're going to have this big ping pong like we always have when we have these kind of drashot. O mibai le'lechalek. O is there to say, you might have thought this was obvious, but it says shor o chamor. What could you have said otherwise? Shor v'chamor. Now, if you said shor and chamor, what would you have thought? Maybe, no, it's a ridiculous thought, which is what Rabbi Yehuda is going to say. But you could have thought shor and chamor have to fall for you to be liable. What if only one falls? Maybe you're not liable. Lechalek means this or that. That's usually what the word o comes to say, this or that. Rabbi Yehuda, where does he get lechalek then? Okay, maybe it's not obvious. So where would he learn it from if the O is not free to teach you that? Well, he learns it mi vin nafal nafke. He says, wait a minute, look at the pasuk. It says, and falls into the bore, a shor or a chamor. Now, the word of vin nafal is singular. The word is singular. That obviously means only one of them fell in. The Rabbanan, vin nafal tshuva mashma. The rabbis say, there's a lot of times in the Torah where it says something in singular and it means it in plural. For example, Rashi gives, va'asa b'tzalel v'aliyav. Batzael and Aliyab did, okay, they were doing the building of the Mishkan. Asa is singular, and then it says 2 people, so that's plural. Uba ha'ot va'mofet, and the ot and the mofet will happen. This is in the Navi, in case about talking about a Navi, whether it's a Navi Sheker or a Navi Emet. So uba is singular, but it's talking about two things, the ot and the mofet. So that doesn't prove anything. Nafal could be plural, which means you need the o to say it's one or the other and not both. Okay, so that's the ping pong back and forth. Now the Gemara asks a question. And the Gemara says, Ema, why don't we say the following? V'nafal klal, shor v'chamor prat, klal uprat, ein bechlal elamasha b'prat. Shor v'chamor, in midyach reinila. Let's look at the pasuk. Okay, v'chiv tach ishbor, v'chre ishbor. Okay, a person digs or opens or digs a pit. V'lo yichasenu, it doesn't cover it. That part of the pasuk we're not interested in at all. Then it says, v'nafal shama shor o chamor. Now, v'nafal would sound like anything falls. That's a klal. Then it gets to, but what actually falls in according to the pasuk? A shor or a chamor. Now, that would mean this is a classic style of klal uprat. And when you have a klal uprat, what do we say? Klal uprat, ein bechlal elamasha b'prat. Okay? So from there, we're going to assume, right? Only things that are like the details. Shor v'chamor imi diachrini lo. Maybe this halacha is only shor and chamor. Forget about Adam and Kelim. It doesn't even mean any other animals. Maybe it means only an ox or, right? In fact, it makes sense, right? The Torah gives an example of a shor and a chamor. Maybe it means just them who fall into a pit you're liable for. To which they say, and really what we're getting at is, why did we need to say Adam, not Adam, not Kelim? It could have been obvious from the word shor v'chamor and the Drashot we're going to say right now. Well, Amre, so first they want to know, why is it not just shor v'chamor and nothing else? Well, Amre bal habor yishalem. Okay, there's a klal after that. It says v'nafal shama shor chamor, and then it says bal habor yishalem. Now, bal habor yishalem sounds like the bal habor pays for any kind of damages. That's already a klal. So now we have, forget about a klal uprat. If you have klal uprat, then it's going to be only the prat. If you have a klal prat and then a klal, again, a generalization, a specific, and then a generalization again, you're going to expand that prat. And how are you going to expand it? Klal upratu klal yatadan elakein haprat. You're going to expand it to be something that's similar to the prat. Not klal uprat is only the prat. Once you have another klal at the end, that comes to say, well, we're going to include more things, but only things similar to that. In which case, we're going to get to ma haprat meforash ba'alei chayim av kol ba'alei chayim. So then you're going to get to that includes all animals. Okay, and we're now going to say, theoretically, you wouldn't need then. According to the pasuk, it only includes animals. It's already by itself not going to include Adam and Kelim. So why do you need a special drasha to say not Adam, not Kelim? To which they say, well, if you use the klal upratu klal, you actually wouldn't have gotten to all ba'alei chayim. What are all ba'alei chayim? It includes behemot, domesticated animals, chayot, undomesticated animals, and ofot, birds. Notice shor and chamor. Shor is a behema. Chamor is a chaya, but it doesn't say anything about birds. So maybe birds were out. If you use the klal upratu klal, ima prat meforash davar shenivletam etama b'magal v'masa, av kol davar shenivletam etama b'magal v'masa. You might have thought it's only like a shor v'chamor. Interesting, this is what they come up with, what typifies them. That if they die, those kind of animals, a shor, a chamor, the nevela is mitame. There's something called, right? The nevela we know you can't eat. It's also mitame. It carries impurity with it. So if it touches something, if you carry it on a tray, then you're, right, it passes tuma by carrying, by touching. Aval ofot lo, but not birds, because birds aren't mitame. Their nevela is not mitame in that way. Okay, there happens to be what's called nevelat of tahol, which is a specific, just one second, I'm going to plug something in. My signal connection is not great. Let's see if that improves it. 1 second. Okay. So now, nevelat of tahor is a unique type of tuma by nevela, which is only a kosher bird, and while it's in your mouth, it's a whole different thing. But it's not mitame. The nevela of a bird is not mitame b'magal masa. So maybe you would think, and now we're getting to this issue that it's possible that when we say you're liable for animals that fall into a pit, we mean only, according to a klal upratu klal, we would get to the conclusion it would exclude birds, okay, which is not true, and that's why we're going to be a little bit stuck here. Aval ofot lo. So in Cain, they say no, because if you wanted to say only animals and not birds, you would have said, you would have just had it say shor, or just have it say chamor. And that's why once it has both, it must be including birds as well. Because if it was just had one, we would say, oh, klal, prat, klal, we have the general, v'nafal. We have shor, let's say, klal, prat. We have balabor yishalem, klal. And then that would say only things that are like a shor that the nevel is matami. You don't need chamor also. Chamor must be to include something additional, must be to include the birds. To which the Gemara says that's not a good theory. Why is it not a good theory? Because, hey, nichtov, you want to say just write one of them, but that would be problematic because if you write one, you wouldn't have been able to learn all sorts of other animals. Forget about birds, okay? You wouldn't have been able to learn other regular animals because you would say, if you just had shor, you would have thought only things that get sacrificed on the altar, right? Because a shor can be a sacrifice. So maybe that would exclude you're only liable for damages. Again, they're raising things that seem to be ridiculous because why would we distinguish that when we're talking about damages? But again, it's not ridiculous because what they're saying is, why did the Torah say shor and chamor really? Okay, so shor, you would think, what typifies a shor? It can go on the altar. Therefore, it has chamor to teach you, no, even things that don't go on the altar. It's a special halacha by chamor that you have to redeem the firstborn with a seh. So, and if not, you have to be ba'arafto. That's a unique halacha by chamor. You might have thought it's only then chamor that has this sanctity of bechor in it, and not other animals that don't. Therefore, it has shor to teach you no. So you need both those to teach you animals. If you need those both to teach you animals, then the two together should teach you animals and only animals and not birds. So if you have this gzerash, if you have this klalu pratu klal, you're not going to be able to learn all animals. So we want to figure out, how do we know all animals are included? So ela amakra vehameti hiyelo kol debal mita. So now we're going to go to option 2. If you look at the chart, okay, you'll see here in the chart. So we had, again, shor should be adam, not adam. Chamor is not vessels. We're just in chachamim right now. O is lechalek. It's either or. Nafal, we just said it could be singular. It could be also rabim, and therefore you need the O. Then balabor yishalem, we thought it could teach you all animals, but no, from a klal pratu klal, it doesn't. So now we're going to try something else. Hameti hiyelo, maybe that teaches you all animals. So now why? Because kol debar mita, anything that could potentially die. Okay? Now, you have to remember, according to the rabbis, if hameti hiyelo includes anything that could potentially die, it's not davar mita, dibar, that could potentially die. So now, okay, you see it's crossed out because we're going to eventually reject this option. We're going to say, hameti hiyelo, okay, that's in the board case, so it must be something that could die. So, bein l'Rabbanan de kamematu l'kelim, ubein l'Rabbi Yehuda de kamerabi l'kelim, kelim b'nei mitanu. They now say, wait a minute. Hameti hiyelo comes to include every living being. So that would include humans, which is fine because then chamor comes to exclude. So the words hameti hiyelo comes to say anything that can live. Comes shol v'lo adam to say, but not a person. Okay, because a person would have been in because it could be dead, right? It could die, or it does die, but it's excluded because of a different word. Well, then you'd have to do the same thing with kelim, according to the rabbis. Kelim are in because they're bar mita, but they're then out because of hamor v'lo kelim. Well, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you are going to include kelim, how can you possibly include kelim if the criteria is they have to be bar mita? Okay, this part about including all animals, by the way, is really according to the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda. It's not specific to the rabbis. So now they're going to say, according to Rabbi Yehuda, how could you possibly add kelim? And according to the rabbis, how could you have thought kelim were in? Hameti hiyelo would already exclude kelim naturally. You wouldn't need chamor v'lo kelim because they don't die. Kelim they're not living beings that could die. So amrei shviratan zohi mitatan. They said, what do you mean? You could call a kli dead. If it breaks, it's dead. That's its death. So theoretically, there could be death by kelim. And that's why hameti hiyelo comes to include adam, shol, animals, any kind of animals, even birds, and kelim. Comes shor, excludes adam, chamor excludes kelim, or according to Rabbi Yehuda, kelim are in, and it all fits because anyway, they're also bar mitah. Ula Rav de Amar Borsh Chiva Lav Torah Lahav Lo Velo Lachavto. But wait, we have another question. If you're going to say kelim theoretically could have been in because they could die, now, how do they die when they fall in a bore? They shatter from the impact. Well, this goes back to Rav. Rav says, what are you chayav in bore for the hevel and not the impact? Bein le Rabbanan, bein le Rabbi Yehuda. Again, according to the rabbis, why would you have even thought they were in the first place that you have to exclude them? And according to Rabbi Yehuda, why are they in? According to Rav, kelim b'nei havla ninu. Kelim don't die. Let's say they do die, okay? They break. They don't break from breathing in lethal fumes. Come on, that doesn't obviously happen. This is very interesting. They say that no, actually, a brand new vessel could break from the fumes inside the bowl. Okay, try it out. I don't know. You make pottery or things like that, see what happens. Try putting them with lethal fumes. Could it possibly break in the beginning? Maybe it's possible, and that's what they claim. So they come up with some excuse around this. Okay, but in any case, we're going to reject this. So whether you don't buy into this, it's okay, because they're going to say, Amei yellow clearly, and you could have told me this, because Amei yellow we used yesterday for a different drasha. They say you can't learn from Amei yellow that it's anything that could die, and then theoretically maybe that would include kelim. But hi Amei yellow, but really what was it trying to include? All animals, right? We're going to include also birds, not just animals, not just domesticated and undomesticated. Hi, but we need it for a different drasha. The Amarava short psulei mukdashim shenafal lebul patul shene'amar v'hameki yellow b'misha meit shalo. We already said you're only liable if the shore that fell in or the animal that fell in wasn't a disqualified animal that was meant for a sacrifice and got disqualified, because that is not fully owned by the owner. And here it says that the mate is belonging to the owner. In other words, once it dies, it's now the owner's, which we learned all these things about nevela and all that, but we also learned that it excludes you don't actually pay damages if it's not owned by the person. So yellow we need for a different drasha. You can't use it for this. So we're going to have to find a different pasuk to work on how we know that all animals are going to be liable here. Ela amar kra kesef yashiv leba'alav lerabot kol di'it leba'al. So now they say, here comes the pasuk we're going to actually learn it from. Kesef yashiv leba'alav. What does it mean? You return the money, meaning you repay the person who has, right, who's the owner of this item. Which lerabot, that includes kol di'it leba'al. Any animal that has an owner. Okay, so obviously we're now limiting it to birds that have owners, which makes sense because who else are you paying back, right? If you cause damage to a bird, I see you're asking also how could birds fall into a pit. I assume they're talking about, I don't know, an ostrich that's walking or something like that, right? A bird that's walking on the ground. And we would have a case basically where the bird falls in, okay, and has an owner to be paying the damages to. So now it's anyone who has ba'alim, anyone who has an owner. So now, ihachi, they say, wait a minute. If you're going to say anyone who has an owner, just like we said, anyone who could die, well then, ihachi afilu kelim v'adam nami. Then that should include vessels and humans. Now, what does it mean humans have owners? Well, slaves. Okay, slaves, for example, if your slave falls in, so again, we said if a person falls in, including your, right, what case would a person fall in? We don't pay damages to you if it's you. We don't pay damages to you if it's your slave. Any human is not included in this. So why not? A slave has owners, so why wouldn't it be included? Well, the obvious reason. Theoretically, it is included from kesef yashiv leba'alav, anyone who has owners, but ihachi amar kra shor velo adam chamor velo kelim. We go back to our basic mantra: shor and not adam, chamor and not kelim. In other words, kesef yashiv leba'alav would theoretically include them, but then they get excluded from a different word in the pasuk. Ula Rabbi Yehuda d'kamarabe lehu lekelim. Rabbi Yehuda, who includes kelim, bishlam ashor memai pe adam. Ela chamor mai memai pe. Now we have to figure out one last thing before we finish this sugya. So let's go back to our chart. We see our chart. And now our chart says, right, shor velo adam. Again, sorry for the mistake here for those who are watching on the screen. Again, in about half an hour, will be fixed on the website. Chamor velo kelim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, shor velo adam also, because he doesn't think you're chayav for damages to an adam. But chamor velo kelim, there is no drasha. So what does he do with chamor? What's chamor doing in the pasuk? Ela amarava, chamor debor Rabbi Yehuda, vised aveda ledivrei hakol kasha. He says, well, guess what? He says, we don't have an answer. According to Rabbi Yehuda by chamor in this pasuk, we have nothing to say. We don't know why chamor appears in the pasuk. And we just have to leave it as we don't always have answers to all our questions. And if you want to point out another one, he says, the set in the Avedah psukim, okay, I forgot to bring this on the sheet, but in Devarim chapter 22, pasuk Gimel, I brought on the sheet, it says, v'chein taseh lechamoro, v'chein taseh lesimlato. It's for the chamor, for a simla, for some covering the person has, v'chein taseh lechol avedat achicha. Anything that your friend loses, you have to return. The pasuk before it says, if you find a shor or if you find a seh. So the drashot on that pasuk are, shor teaches you this, chamor teaches you that, simla teaches you this, and we have a whole list of l'chol avedat achicha. What does it teach you? But seh, according to everybody, we actually have no idea why it says seh in that previous pasuk. So basically what he's pointing out is sometimes we don't really have answers to questions. And here are two examples, the chamor in the bor case and the seh in the avedah case. The chamor, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we have no answer. Of course, according to the rabbis, it comes to exclude kelim. And the seh in the avedah case, just mentioning something by the way, we also have no explanation for. So what we did was we took the psukim to say why not Adam, why not kelim according to the rabbis, why yes kelim according to Rabbi Yehuda, and then we tried 3 attempts till we got to the third one and we're successful. How do we know that all animals are included, including birds? Okay, and that we explained. So now in the end we got it from Kesef Yashiv LeBa'alav. We couldn't learn from Yellow, that was busy. We couldn't learn from Klal Prato Klal because we actually wouldn't include birds from that. So that would exclude birds specifically. Now we're going to go to the next part in the Mishna, and then we're going to get to the next Mishna, which actually is going to connect back to what we've been doing now. In fact, part of the sugya, we're going to see a complete repeat of a sugya we saw in first here. Now, this is a little bit tricky again, because I already taught you what this means when we learned it in the Mishnah. But right now, forget everything I told you. If you already forgot, even better. Sometimes it's good to not remember everything. But right now, the Mishnah tells us, if a shor cheresh shoteh katan, which we don't yet know what this means, falls into a bor, you're liable, which seems to imply you're not liable if it's not a cheresh shoteh katan. So now we have to understand what this means. What is a shor cheresh shoteh katan? Is the cheresh shoteh katan defining the shor, or is it defining the owner of the shor? So the obvious is usually cheresh shoteh katan are talking about humans, and we must be talking about the owner. So that's what the Gemara first thinks. My shor cheresh shoteh katan. What are we talking about even? Ilam a shor shel cheresh, shor shel shoteh, shor shel katan. That the owner is a cheresh shoteh katan, right? Is a deaf mute, a shoteh, doesn't have sound mind, or is a katan, a minor. So basically, we're talking about 3 people that are considered halachically without da'at, without understanding. Well, hashor shel pikach patur. The inference of that Mishnah is if it was a shor of a pikach, it would be exempt. Okay, wait a minute. You're going to have to pay if my shor falls in, if I am cheresh shoteh katan. But if I'm a regular person and my shor falls in, you're not going to pay me damages? That makes no sense to make that distinction. What does it matter if the owner of the shor that falls into the bor has knowledge, doesn't have knowledge? It's irrelevant. So I'm a Rabbi Yochanan, shor shehu cheresh, shor shehu shoteh, shor shehu katan. It's defining the ox, not the owner. The ox is cheresh shoteh katan. So now we have a bit of a problem, starting with Amud Bet. Ha shor shehu pikach patul, but from there you would infer that a shor shehu pikach is exempt. Now, why would a shor who has his wits about him, okay, whoever we say he has knowledge, right? We always say animals don't really have knowledge, but we know that animals do have some sort of inherent, some knowledge of some sort. So a shor that's a pikach and not cheresh shoteh katan. Okay, so he's not deaf, mute. He doesn't speak anyway, but not deaf, not blind, not right. We saw blind come up in a different sugya. It didn't say it here. What, you're going to be exempt if a regular shor falls into a bor? Now the conclusion of the Gemara is going to be yes, but we're not there yet. So it's going to take us a little while to get there. So first they say that sounds ridiculous. Why should it matter if the shor is pikach or not pikach? Right? Pikach means everything, his wits are about him. He understands, he can see, can hear, he can be aware of his surroundings. I'm a Rabbi Yimia lo mebaya. Rabbi Yimia says the Mishna is a lo mebaya structure. What's a lo mebaya structure? It doesn't state the obvious. Just because it says one thing doesn't mean we infer the opposite of the other case. No, we didn't mention the other case because it was so obvious it was true. So, of course you're liable if the shore of the felon was a pikach. But shor cheresh shoteh katan ema, you might have thought. Now, what's the logic? We're going to actually flip the logic on its head later. This is a good proof of you could try to prove anything. You might have thought what? If the shore was deaf, maybe his deafness caused him to fall. You might have thought his deafness caused him to fall into the pit. You might have thought the fact that he was young caused him to fall into the pit. And it's not the fault of the owner of the bore. The owner of the bore built a bore that would protect, that a bore, most people know to watch out for the bore. So maybe I'm not really liable. But, if it's their fault, again, this is always a shifting of blame. If you can say the blame is more on the other side, then I won't be obligated. So maybe you'd say, maybe I'll be exempt because we can blame it on something that's wrong with the shore, not me. Kamash malan, that's why it has to teach you, no. So what it means is the Mishna is teaching you something unique that you might not have thought of. But of course, a shore pikach that falls into the bore, I'm liable to pay damages for. I dug the pit. But it's teaching you, even if the shore wasn't fully with the program, still, I would have to pay damages. So this all sounds good. However, this doesn't work well with some braitot. Okay, now we're going to have a braitot, and then we're going to bring another braitot. But let's try this one first. But doesn't it say in a braitot? Now, this whole thing was premised on that the shore who's bardat, who has knowledge, right, who's with the program, falls into the bore, you're liable. You are liable. This seems to indicate if a bardat falls in, now we're assuming what kind of bardat, it must be a shore. Now we'll get back to this. Maybe it's not, but right now we assume it's a shore bardat. So my love, shore bardat, and what does it say? You're exempt, which goes against what Rabbi Yimia said. Rabbi Yimia said, of course you're liable when the regular shore falls into the bore. Amar lei, lo adam. What do you mean? When it says bardat, it means a person bardat. Okay? Now, if you say, now that makes sense with what we know. If a person who's a bardat falls into a bore, you're exempt because shor velo adam, right? You're exempt from adam. But something doesn't jive there. You're exempt from any person who falls into a pit, not just a bardat. So therefore, to plug in the word adam instead of shor, right? The word is missing. The main word here. Is it a shor? Is it an adam? So we're going to fill in shor. We say, and that contradicts Rabbi Yimia. We're going to say, so not shor. Let's say adam. But if it's adam, we have a different problem. Elameata adam bardad hu de patul halad ben dad hu de chayav shor v'la adam ktiv. You can't say that if the adam is a shoteh katan, you're going to be liable for damages if they fall into the pit because we already exempted from shor v'la adam all adam. So you can't say an adam bardad you're going to be exempt for, but an adam who's not bardad, who doesn't have knowledge, you're going to be liable for them. That doesn't fit in with what we've been learning. So it can't be that. So what do they say? Elamai ben dat, min ben dat. Now they're going to say something. They're going to say what it means when it says bardat is a type. Ben dat is just a catchphrase for any human because any human is a bardat compared to animals. Okay, so therefore, even though there might be some categories within that we think don't have halachic knowledge, like a cheresh shoteh katan, but what this source meant was humans in general. Okay, so when it said nafal tocho bal da'at patur, if a human falls in, you're going to be exempt, and that's all it meant. And it meant shor v'lo adam, and then it doesn't have anything to do with our shor distinguishing between right and saying there is no distinction between a shor ben dad and not ben dad, and that's going to fit with Rabbi Yimia, who said this includes all shores you're going to be liable damages. However, we have a problem with this. Amar le v'hatanya, but he says back to him, you want to explain this braitot as saying it's not talking about a shore, but what about this braitot? And he pulls another braitot out of his sleeve, and he says, nafal tocho shor ben da'at patur. This source has the missing word, and it says a shor ben da'at falls into a bore, you're exempt. You can't explain that as a human, and now you have trouble because a shor ben da'at you're exempt from, and that's not what you said, Rabbi Yimia. So therefore, Ela Amar Rava explains, and this is the way we're going to finally understand this, and this is how I explained it when we learned the Mishna. Shor vu cheresh, shor vu shoteh, shor vu katan dafka. It's specifically that shore that you're liable for. Aval, shore vu pikach patul. But if you have a shore who's pikach, who's a knowledgeable shore who understands what's going on in the world, right? Which basically means he can see, he can hear, he can sense danger, all of that, and he's not too young, you're going to be exempt. My taima, and this is a very important phrase, and it's a phrase we saw earlier with people as well. Debaile yune umesam. He should have been looking where he was going, that shore. Okay, just like we have with Haminiach Takad. Why are you exempt? If Adamu ala olam, and one of the answers was because people are supposed to look where they're going. Okay, maybe you shouldn't have left your pod there, but people should be watching where they're going, right? It's when you can shift the blame to the other side, then you become exempt. So I dug a pit, but you know what? People have eyes; they should see. Shores also, animals have eyes; they can see, they can notice there's a boar there. They're not idiots. They sense danger. If they fell into the boar, that's their fault, not my fault. Okay, and then fascinating because we've been learning about boar all this while. You're liable for damages for all animals, only if. Okay, we're now going to see it in a braitot. Tanya namihachi. Only if nafala tocho shor chere shoteh katan or suma, a blind shore, or mahalech balayla, or if the animal had its wits about him but was walking at night where you can't see where you're going, then chayav. Then it's my responsibility. But pikach u'malech bayom patur. But if it was a shore with its wits about him and it was during the day, then I'm actually not liable, which is a fascinating, right? After we've been learning about boar, and it applies to all animals, right? We've already limited to not adam, not kilim. I want to specify, by the way, not adam, if you remember, means if a person falls and dies, I'm not liable. If a person falls and gets damaged, I actually have to pay damages, but I'm not liable for the death of a person because the assumption is a bore that deep, a person should have been paying attention and should watch out for themselves. Whereas damage is not as much so. So I'm not liable for a person who dies. I'm not liable for a vessel that breaks, unless I'm Rabbi Yehuda who does. And we learned that I'm not liable for a shore any animal who can pay attention to where they're going. So it's very limited to all the damages of boar in general from this. Okay, now we're going to move on to the next Mishna. And now the next Mishna addresses really what we discussed at the beginning of class. It says shor v'chamor, but it really means all animals. So we're now going to say echad shor ve'echad kol behema. We're now going to say shor or any animal is going to be for the following cases. L'nefilat habor. Okay, if it falls in a boar, it's going to be a shor or any other animal, including birds. Also, okay, we're now going to have a list of things. Hafrashat har Sinai. I'm going to read you all the psukim now. Okay, if you look at the sheet. So in Shmot, chapter 19, pasuk 13, this is when we were told to leave Har Sinai. See, there's a typo here. Lo tigabo kol yad, don't touch the mountain. Ki sakol yisakel yaro yiret, im behemayim ish lo yichya. Okay, anyone who comes near the mountain, whether it's an animal, whether it's a person, will not survive. Okay, God said, stay away from Har Sinai while I'm giving the Torah. So that's going to mean, says behema. Behema includes all animals, all birds, everything. L'tashlume kefel. This is in Shmot Perek Kasbet, talks about if you're watching something and then it's stolen from your house, and if you don't find the ganav, then you have to go. And I'll call Dvar Pesha, it says, I'll shor, I'll chamor, I'll sell, sama, I'll call and then it says, Yishalem Shnaim L'Re'eyu. Okay, if you steal something, you have to pay double. And notice it says shor, chamor, and se. Okay, or a salma. Okay, now that's an item, but we're talking about the animal part. Any animal, not just a shor, chamor, and se, but includes any animal, any bird that somebody steals, you have to pay double. Ula hashavat aveda. I just read something yesterday about a bird being stolen that they found a bird of someone's in Gaza that was stolen from someone in one of the kibbutzim nearby, or one of the, I forget exactly where, but stolen birds anyway. Ula hashavat aveda, returning lost items. That one also goes. Now returning it. They returned it to its owner. So returning lost items, it says. So we saw it said about a set, said about a shore. Then it says v'chein taseh lechamoro, v'chein taseh lesimlato. So now we say it includes also all animals and all birds you're required to return. Liprika. This is Shmot chapter 23, pasuk 5. You see the chamor of your enemy, okay? It's really anybody that's suffering under it. It's got too heavy a burden, and you don't, right? You have to help him, basically, to help the chamor. Now here it says chamor, but it's going to mean all animals. Lichasima, that's lo tachsom shor b'disho, when the shore is doing its work, in the field. You can't muzzle it and not allow it to eat anything. Kilayim. Kilayim breaks into two. One is you can't crossbreed animals and to create like a crossbred animal from two different animals. And also that's in Vayikra Yotet, 1919. And Varim chapter 22, Pasuk 10, Lo tachrosh b'shor v'chamor yachdav. You can't make two animals work in something together. You can't have them, let's say, pulling a plowshare together if they're two different types of animals. That's also kilayim. So notice in one it says behem techa, and the other it says b'shor u'v'chamor. Okay, now, so again, all these, even though they might be specific or they might be general, they all mean not only behemot, not only shor and chamor, not only, right, but everything. And le Shabbat. Okay, the last one is Shabbat, which says on Shabbat, all your animals have to rest. Okay, your son, your daughter, your slave, your amah, uvehem techa, it says in the first set, and your animals. In the second set, it says shorcha v'chamorcha v'chol behem techa, your ox, your donkey, and all your animals. So we're going to darshan all these things and see how they get to everything. But they say this means echad shor echad kol behema, the Mishnah had said, and now it says at the end of the Mishnah, v'chein chayav v'of kayotze behen. Okay, this doesn't only mean domesticated animals, it also includes undomesticated animals, it also includes birds. All these psukim. In came. So that if so, the Mishnah says, Lama ne'amar shor chamor. So why did it keep saying shor and chamor? Should have said shor and off, Why didn't it say that? Well, ela shediber katuv b'hoveh. It talked about the typical cases, right? Like we said before, how often someone asked, right? How often it is a bird falls into a pit? That's not very common. But a shor falling into a pit is much more common. Okay, and plus it seemed like more people probably had shors and chamors than maybe some of the other animals, although you see set also they had a lot. That's mentioned in some of the psukim. The psukim just talked about the typical cases. Okay, so now let's go one at a time. Well, nifilat bor, how do we know it includes everyone? Well, we already said that, so we're just going to review that very quickly. Kesef yashiv leba'alav, kol le'balim kedamaran. Okay, as we said, kesef yashiv leba'alav, anyone who has an owner, which would include behema, chaya, and oaf. Lahafrashat har Sinai. It says, im behema im ish. So if you want, you can look at the sheet and see the psukim. Lo yichye, will not survive. V'chaya bichlal behema havya. So the word behema, often in the Torah, behema means both domesticated and undomesticated animals. So that already includes chaya. What about off? Im, it says, im behema im adam. Why does it have to say im? Just could have said behema o adam. So im lerabot et haofot. L'tashlume, so that includes the birds. Tashlume kefo, we're just going one by one. Kedam rinan, al kol dvar pesha klal, al debar pshia. It says on any kind of pesha that you do. So any kind of pesha sounds to, right? Any kind of bad act that you do by stealing someone's item. So that would be stealing anything of theirs. La shavat aveda lechol avedat achicha. Again, there's a word that says to anything they lose. So once it says anything they lose, it obviously includes even birds. Liprika. Now the next bunch, okay, maybe I'll pull up the sheet so you can see. The next bunch is prika, chasima, and kilayim, which break into two. So now they're going to say liprika, yalav chamor, chamor mishabat. All these are going to be the same. We're going to have gzera shava between a word that appears here and a word that appears in the Shabbat psukim. Remember, in the Shabbat psukim it says behema, shol, and chamor. So we're going to learn from prika, it says chamor. We're going to learn chamor, chamor mishabat. Now, we haven't learned how we know it by Shabbat, but once we get to that, we'll be able to backtrack and say, since it's by Shabbat and chamor appears here, the word chamor appears in prika. From there, we learn that what's true for Shabbat is true for there, which means it includes all animals. Chasima, yalef shor shor mishabat, gzera shava again from Shabbat. The kilayim. Kilayim de harisha, where it says shol, so we're going to learn shor shor mishabat. Kilayim de harba'a, if you're talking about the crossbreeding, yalef behem techa mishabat. There it says behema, so we're going to learn from Shabbat. Okay, so it's very simple. Chamor there, shor and chamor there, and behema there, and we're going to learn all of those gzera shava to Shabbat. V'gabei Shabbat minalan. So first we have to understand where did we get Shabbat from. Titanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer Mishum Rabbi Yishmael. And now we're going to talk about the difference between the first set of the Ten Commandments and the second set. Right, they're mentioned both in Shmot and in Tvarim. In the first Dibrot, it says, Avdecha v'amatcha ubehemtecha. Your slave, your maidservant, and your animals all have to rest on Shabbat. They can't work. Now, right, your shor, your chamor, your ox, your donkey, and all your animals. So they ask, Halo shor v'chamor bichlal kol behemayu v'lama yatzu. Once you say behemtecha in Shmot, why did you need to add shorcha and chamorcha? Lomar lecha ma shor v'chamor ha'amor kan chaya v'of kayotze behen, av kol chaya v'of kayotze behen. So now they're going to say, because it says here, shor and chamor, and you already said be'emtecha, which includes everyone, therefore we're going to assume that anytime it says shor v'chamorcha, it's going to mean everyone. Ema, they say, wait a minute, why don't you say this? And they're going to question this whole thing. Behema, and this is the same line of questioning we did in the beginning of our daf. Why don't we say, did you brought Harishano klal? Shorcha v'chamorcha, did you brought achrono prat? Klalu prat, ein bechlal, and last prat. How did you get that shorcha v'chamorcha includes all animals, that we're then going to learn that every time it says shor and chamor, we're going to mean all animals? So they say, why don't you say the opposite? Be'emtecha ze klal. Now, klalu prat usually is next to each other in the pasuk. But here they're going to say, take the dibrot rishonot and put them together with the dibrot shniot. So we have the first 10 commandments and the second, like mentioning of the 10 commandments. And the first one, it says be'emtecha, that's general. Then it says shor v'chamorcha. Maybe you would think, okay, well then it's just shor v'chamor. That comes to define the behema we mentioned earlier. And then it would be just shor and chamor can't work on Shabbat, midi achrina lo, but anything else can. Amre b'chol be'emtecha did you brought achronot chazar v'kalal klal u'prat u'klal yatadan elakena prat ma prat mefurash b'alei chayim av kol b'alei chayim. So they say, well, you missed the end. The end is b'chol be'emtecha. There's a klal at the end. Once we bring in the klal, we're going to say, oh wait, klal u'prat u'klal. Then we get to it includes anything that's like shor v'chamorcha, and then we include all animals, and we can include birds. Wait, no, not. This is what we did already. If you're going to say klal u'prat u'klal, ema prat mefurash davar shenivlato mitameh b'magav masa, shor and chamor, their nevelas mitameh b'magav masa by touching and carrying. That would exclude birds if you use a klal u'prat u'klal. So first we said maybe it's just shor v'chamorcha. Once we got to klal u'prat, at least we said things that are like it. Things that are like it, that would be animals and not birds. So amre in ken prata. So again, we're going to say, if you wanted to exclude birds, you would have just said either shor or chamor. To which the Gemara is going to say, you couldn't have written just one. Again, good review from the beginning of the daf. Hey, which one could it have written according to what you're saying? If it just said shor, you would have thought only things that go on the altar can't work, but other animals that don't can work on Shabbat. And that's why it has to say chamor. Right? The special din for chamor about being sanctified, the firstborn is sanctified. So therefore, katav rachman is short to teach you it's not that. So both are necessary. You can't say if it really wanted to exclude birds, it would have used just one. So theoretically, you could say this really is excluding birds. Ella. So how do we include the birds? They're now going to say the highlighted words here that I highlighted on the screen. Ella v'chol behemtecha ribuyahu. It's not from a klal u'prat u'klal. We use the words v'chol behemtecha. What is v'chol behemtecha? All animals. Okay, now they're going to say, wait a minute, we got a problem with that too. If you're going to say v'chol behemtecha comes to include all animals, including birds, we have a problem, because I'm going to show you a pasuk. Okay, I didn't bring it on the sheet, but they're now going to say v'chol hecha dekatav rachmana kol ribuyahu. Every time it says kol, it means to include everything. V'hagabe masir. When it comes to masir sheni, you're supposed to bring your fruits to Jerusalem. If you can't, what do? You redeem them to money, and you bring the money to Jerusalem, and you buy all sorts of things. What do you buy with them? According to the pasuk, it says, okay, minatata kesef b'chol asher taveh nafshecha. First, it says you go buy anything you want. That's obviously a klal. Babakar u'batzon bayayin b'shechar. Then it gets specific. You can buy cattle and sheep, those kind, and yayin and shechar, and wine and beer. Prat, that's a detail. And then it says, and anything you wish. That's again a klal. Chazar v'kalal. Klal u'prat u'klal yatadan elakena prat. Well, it can only be like the items. And here we do have a klal u'prat u'klal, and we don't say, it says kol enap, but bikol asher taveh nafshecha. That would seem to include everything and override the klal u'prat like we just did by us. And what does the Drashot say? You can only buy certain things. You can't buy anything. It has to be something that comes from something else, either an animal that comes from another animal, or wine that's made from grapes, or beer that's made from dates. Okay, something that comes out of something else. And it either grows from the ground or gets its sustenance from the ground, like animals get their sustenance from the ground. And therefore, it can only be those things. Rashi says it's come to exclude, for example, mushrooms that don't grow one from the other. Amre, bikol, klala, kol, ribuya. There's a difference between the word bikol. Bikol fits in with the klal u'prat u'klal structure. Kol overrides it and says we're going to include more things. Okay, that's a weak answer, to which the Gemara says, fine, we'll give you a different answer because that is a little weak. Kol nami klalahu. Really, kol should be used as a klal. However, miu hai kol dahacha ribuyu. There's a specific reason in this case. Normally, kol would be to be part of this klalu pratu klal. But in our case, there's some unique reason. And if you look at the psukim, you'll see it right away. If you look at the first 10 commandments, it's the first mention of the 10 commandments, it says uve'emtecha. When it comes the second time, it says v'chol be'emtecha. That's a difference. That difference highlights that there's something unique here, and v'chol be'emtecha then comes to tell you it includes everything, and that's why it's there. So now they say, okay, now we're going to come full circle. So if you just should have had kol be'emtecha, why did you add any other words to that? Kol be'emtecha includes all animals. What do you need be'emtecha in the first Hebrew? What do you need shorcha v'chamucha in the second one? Totally unnecessary. Amre, and now we get back to where we started. Shor la'ag marue, shor la'chasima, chamor la'ag marue, chamor la'prika, be'emtecha la'ag marue, be'emtecha la'kilayim. All the ones that we learned from Gzera Shavas, that's why we needed behemtecha, shorchan, chamorcha, and these psukim that are unnecessary words. They're necessary for the Gzera Shavas to learn that once we learned in Shabbat, kol behemtecha includes everything, then any place where it says shor, chamor, or behemtecha, which are all these three extra words in these psukim, the behemtecha in the first braitot, the shorchan, chamorcha in the second, are to teach you Gzera Shavas, to prika, chasima, kilayim of rivia, and kilayim of charisha. Okay, and that almost ends our sugya. Last line for today. Ihachi, if you're going to say this all comes from Shabbat, then afilu adam litzar. If kol be'emtecha includes everybody, well, then you have amatcha here, avadcha va'amatcha. So now you should say, even all these, if you go back to lo tachrosh shor v'chamor yachdav, if you're going to make a Gzera Shavas to Shabbat, then you're going to learn from it. Number one, it includes all animals. But number two, if the Eved and Amar are there, then you should not be allowed to do kilayim with an Eved and a shor, let's say. Don't have your Eved and shor together work and do the plowing together. Okay? Maybe that would be kilayim. But that's not true. Alamatnan, it says in the Mishna, Adam mutar kulam lachosh v'limshoch. You can do that. So Amra, Papa, once you're making the Gzera Shavas, make it all the way and have the Ama also go and the Eved also go back to the Kilayim pasuk, to which they say no. There's a special, okay, the Papunai knows the reason. Umanu, who is the Papunai? Rav Acha bar Yaakov, maybe he lived in a place called Papuna. Amar Kra, Leman Yanuach Avdecha v'Amatcha Kamocha, so that your Ama and Eved will rest on Shabbat like you. Lahanachai Kashti v'lo l'davar acher. This comes to say, the Eved and Amar are mentioned here specifically when it comes to Menucha and Shabbat, but not for any other issue, and meaning we're not going to take the Gzera Shavas and have it apply to Kilayim also for an Eved and Amar. That's just animals, but we're not going to take the Eved and Amar to there. Okay, quick review of our daf. We started with the Machloket Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis about are you liable for kalim in damages of kalim in a bor, to which we had the whole back and forth, the ping pong, how they learned all those psukim, and how they got from all those psukim to that includes all animals. Yes, are in, but humans are out, and kelim, vessels, there's a debate about. Then we went to the shor cheresh shoteh katan, and we discussed the shor cheresh shoteh katan, what it means, and we took a while till we finally got to the conclusion that really a shor pikach that falls into a bor, you're not liable for damages because they should have been paying attention. And then we mentioned all these cases in the Torah where it mentions some type of animal or animal in general, but it doesn't just mean animal, it also means chayot, it also means ofal. Okay, it also means undomesticated, it also means birds. And how do we derive each one? Some were unique to their specific place, and some were Gzera Shavas from Shabbat. Then we learned how we understood it by Shabbat. It all came from B'chol Behemtecha. And then the extra words were there in order to do Gzera Shavas back to the other situations. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a good day.